Well, hello everybody, this is Tim Green with Rattle Magazine. Welcome to your critique of the week. It's Friday, February 7th. Thanks so much for joining me. Gonna have a lot of fun looking at poems today. Let's see who we've got in the house. Jerry Stephenson's here. Good to see you from Canada. We got Janet McConaughey. Lynn Schilling is here. Shape of Soup. We got Patty Arbor. Nikki Fryer, Dr. Q. D. Coleman is here. Winston Munn. Amy Dower Solorzano. We got Nancy Tennell, Hammett Malik. Let's see, Jamie Thomas is here. Dick Westheimer, hot off the Poetry Space that just released. We got Nancy Sabanik is here. Maria Berg, Tom Barlow, Katie Dozier right over there. Ali Rowland is here. Leo Watson, Lisa Seidenberg, Desi Cochran, Sharon Ferrante. So good to see you all. Clayton Clark, we're going to look at your poems first, Clayton. Brian O'Sullivan is here, too, from the Poetry Space. We got Mary Lisa. D Diminishes, of course. Morgan Feeney's here. Yeah, so great all around over on YouTube. Let's see what we've got on Facebook. Over on Facebook, anybody signed in yet? Donna Best is here. Hey, Donna. We'll try to keep an eye on Facebook, too. Over on X, who knows who's watching? Maybe somebody is, maybe someone's not. We'll figure out. Never, but it does say it has views on X, so we'll see. Anyway, thanks so much for joining me for the critique of the week. As always, the goal is to give that workshop experience that's so valuable. We just talked about that on the workshopping episode of the Poetry Space with Katie Dozier. We dropped the first half of that episode talking about how important and worthwhile and how to make the most of workshops in that creative writing environment. And what we do here is to give that to you for free by having this great audience of poets and lovers of poetry. And we've got me as the editor here, all of us telling you how your poems are landing, how they're received, what works, what doesn't, how to make them better. That's all we're trying to do. And if you'd like to submit, all you got to do is go to rattle.com/critique, find the submission portal there, send 2 poems preferably, and we'll go in the order they're received. But if you're a regular participant, like Clayton Clark is, we'll get to you first, move you right up to the line as soon as I see. We'll do one sort of regular, and then the rest as they come in every week is how we're going to be doing it. And let's take a look at Clayton's poems here. Now, Clayton sent 2, which is what we'd like to see. And let me get this a little bit there. Clayton says this about them. Of course, Clayton from La Cañada, California, not too far away from the Rattles headquarters there in Studio City. And let's see. So Clayton says, for Lines Crossed is the first poem. I wondered if it resonates with you and others. And the Counterfeit poem was submitted as a Hyben issue hopeful. So questions are, is it too wordy, not captivating, and do the title or haiku work? So thanks for your time. Okay, so we're going to take a look at these poems. Let's take a look right now. So this first one is Lines Crossed. And here we go. This is Clayton's first poem. And it's a form. It's an antati, which I've heard before, but I had to look up. I couldn't remember what it was. And you'll notice right away what the form actually is. I think it was a Tagalog form, right? Maybe I should have looked it up more recently. I looked it up a couple weeks ago. Let me look it up and make sure I get that right. Antati poem. Because we were going to do this last week. Oh, Tamil. Yeah, it's kind of Tamil poem. The form is this, which you'll see here. The last word of every stanza, every 3-line stanza becomes the first word of the next stanza is the form. And so you see Clayton, the lie, lies, dream, the dream. So we go through the poem that way. And that's the repetition of this. There's that word for repetition in poetry, which I can never remember. Katie keeps saying it all the time, and I don't know what it is. There's a word for that repetition. This is a form based on repetition like that. And here we go. Let's read the poem first. Lines Crossed. A fish on the line pulled from the lake, smooth as a perfect lie, lies gasping in air for return to its dream. The dream hooked in my father's hand before he sinks back in the hospital bed, hazel eyes dimmed but locked on a latch in the sky. The sky welcomes him, dressed as he is, to his new life, the life a fish on the line pulls him into. So very interesting poem there. And you hear that repetition very strongly in that form. And that's Lines Crossed. And there's a lot that I like about this poem. I do like the form. I like the way that pulls you forward within the poem. And I like a lot of these lines too. So we'll look a little more closely. A fish on the line pulled. Pulled from the lake, smooth as a perfect lie. So the perfect lie is sort of a turn already into something deeper than just fishing, right? I mean, right away we have the lake, a line, and something being pulled. But then we go, and that sort of, to me, that turn into something more abstract from the, we set up a little bit with the setting right there. That turn to the abstract adds a sense of mystery and makes me want to keep reading. We set, in very few words, we set up a little bit of a scene, and then we say, oh, there's more to the scene than you even thought for that moment. So that's a nice way to go. So, pulled from the lake, smooth as a perfect lie, lies gasping in air for return to its dream. And now this is the section, this felt sort of stilted and unnatural to me, this second or third stanza. There's a way that it's not using all the articles right, and it doesn't feel like a natural way of speaking. So pulled from the lake, smooth as a perfect lie is totally fine. Lies gasping in air for return to its dream. That there's just something about the way that it's hard to kind of follow. Its return to its dream. He might have been avoiding repeating the word "it's" or something, but I feel like there's something missing, and that just feels clunky and like something's off in that stanza. So that's something that's very clear, fixed right there. But if we just talk about the content, the fish there is trying to return to its dream. I like that as an idea. We don't have many words. It's a very short form, and we get a lot across going from the image to that deeper place, which is sort of what we did with the first two stanzas when they're combined. Anyway, the dream hooked in my father's hand before he sinks. And this gets very, it moves into even more precise detail. And I think the emotion comes through a little more strongly because it's doing that. So we have like sort of an abstract view of a fish. Then we move into my father's hand, and that precision there, that feels like we're getting closer to something. So that's a nice sense of movement in the poem there. And I like that. So the dream hooked in my father's hand before he sinks back in the hospital bed, hazel eyes dimming. And so here you're sort of moving from this dream into the reality. And so we're having the story revealed as we go. So it's a nice storytelling pacing there. Dimmed but locked on the latch in the sky. And that locked on a latch in the sky, there's a nice sound to that. I like that too. And again, we're using both specificity and abstraction to sort of the full extent. So that's really nice. The sky welcomes him dressed as he is to his new life. And so, the life being whatever comes next, I guess. The sky welcomes him dressed as he is to his new life. The life fish on the line pulls him into. And then so we have that, sense of dreaming in your last hours, and I think that works really well. So to me, I think this is a really nice poem. And lines crossed becomes an interesting metaphor for what's going on here, like sort of different lines of consciousness. And we're crossing over from one line to another in death. And I think it's told really nicely with the fishing line as a metaphor for that and the way you're pulled into the beyond. I think it's a really nice little poem. The only thing to me that stands out, like I said, is this stanza. And I do wonder, since this is a good poem already, what can we add, like little tiny details, like maybe a couple little small details to bring the story to life. If we could see, and the fish in the lake are really abstractions of those things, and they're sort of every man, and the father is sort of every father in this very condensed poem. But if you could make, latch onto a little bit of detail there, I think something unique, and I think that would make the poem come to life a little bit more. So I think that's one thing to play with, and then that third stanza. But otherwise, I think this poem is nice, and the form is used really well too. One thing I wondered, we ended I don't really know the answer to this for an antati, the form. Here we have pulled is the repeated word here. I was wondering if it might circle around and end with fish, but the fish comes here. And I wonder, I don't know if the form's supposed to do that, but it would be kind of fun if you could end on fish again, so it circled back to itself. Instead it ends with pull is like the verb, so it sort of circles back to the third line there. But I don't know, I wonder if you could play with that. And and just rephrase that. It might make the poem a little bit more interesting and fit maybe the form a little more closely. Let's see what everybody else is saying about this one, though. Let's see. I got to scroll down a lot. Yeah. I'm seeing. I don't see the post, but everyone's saying. Sorry about Sharon's cat. So I'm sorry to hear about that. Wherever it was mentioned, Sharon. Let's see. Oh, there it is. Yeah, Kitty Zeus is very sick. Yeah, we were heartbroken. Yeah, I'm so sorry to hear that. Hopefully, Zeus gets better soon. Let's see. Let's see. PMB says change lied gasping to laid gasping. And actually, that's wrong. So it's... it should be lied. Lying is to rest on something. Laying is to be set down on something. So that's the right use of the word, because nobody's laying the fish down unless we were doing it that way. Let's see. Jamie Thomas says it's a great poem, but I'm so unfamiliar with the form that I'm hesitant to make suggestions. It's definitely stirred something in me. Yeah, there's something about how much goes on in this little space, and of course, it's stuff that has deep meaning to it. So, and so I think that is a good example of how concision works. Yeah. Let's see. Trying to see if there's any other comments, because those are really my only two. I think it's a nice poem. Shiba Hoop says, I've been working on layered depth and surface level abstraction. This poem is doing a pretty good job with this. It welcomes multiple reads. Yeah, I agree. It does. It's a nice poem. And Terry Miller says here, make a list of fish, water, verbs, nouns to fish new lines from. Yeah, I wouldn't want to expand the poem, but I think if you had a little bit more detail, if we could see the fish a little more clearly, if we could see the hand, the father's hand a little more clearly, maybe some detail about his hand. I don't know. There's just something. If you could come up with an original little detail to notice at each of those things, I think the poem would come to life a little bit more. It might be something to play with. Yeah. Brian O'Sullivan says Elizabeth Bishop's The Fish could be good to look at if you want to think about adding more fish imagery. That's a good suggestion. I wonder if we could pull that up and just look at it briefly. Why not? Yeah, let's read a little bit of The Fish, and let's see how, just for some kind of ideas, what you could do to come up with some more... This is Elizabeth Bishop. I caught a tremendous fish and held him beside the boat, half out of water, with my hook fast in a corner of his mouth. See, that's the kind of thing. If we had like a sense of the hook fast in a corner of his mouth, that little detail that we could, and if it was only that, but then we'd see the fish a little more clearly, and it's just a few little sprinklings of those can really bring the poem to life. He didn't fight. He hadn't fought at all. He hung a grunting weight, battered and venerable and homely. Here and there his brown skin hung in strips like ancient wallpaper, and its pattern of darker brown was like wallpaper. Shapes like full-blown roses stained and lost through age. So there's nice, that unique detail. You won't think of a fish, and then you go to full-blown roses stained and lost through age. He was speckled with barnacles, fine rosettes of lime, and infested with tiny white sea lice, and underneath 2 or 3 rags of green weed hung down. So that's a lot of detail there. While his gills were breathing in the terrible oxygen, terrible oxygen is cool. The frightening gills, fresh and crisp with blood that can cut so badly. I thought of the coarse white flesh packed in like feathers, the big bones and the little bones, the dramatic reds and blacks of his shiny entrails, and the pink swim bladder like a big peony. I looked into his eyes, which were far larger than mine, but shallower and yellowed, the irises backed and packed with tarnished tin foil seen through the lenses of old scratched isinglass. They shifted a little, but not to return my stare. It was more like the tapping of an object toward the light. I admired his sullen face, the mechanism of his jaw, and then I saw that from his lower lip, if you could call it a lip, grim, wet, and weapon-like, hung 5 old pieces of fish line and 4 and a wire leader with a swivel still attached, and all their 5 big hooks grown firmly in his mouth. A green line frayed at the end where he broke it, 2 heavier lines, and a fine black thread still crimped from the strain and snap when it broke and he got away, like metals with their ribbons frayed and wavering, a 5-haired beard of wisdom trailing in his aching jaw. I stared, and victory filled up the little rented boat from the pool of bilge, where oil had spread its rainbow around the rusted engine to the bailer rusted orange, the sun-cracked thwarts, the oarlocks and their strings, the gunnels, until everything was rainbow, 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 and I let the fish go. So that's great, and I know that was longer than I intended to read, but so once you get going, you can't not read the whole poem. And that was The Fish by Elizabeth Bishop, one of my favorite. I was thinking, too, of Neruda's poem, the Ode to... what kind of, is it ode to a tuna? Or is it just ode to the fish? Whatever that is, the fish in the market that, like a torpedo, that whole poem. Check that one out, the Neruda's ode to, like, whatever that is. Is it a fish in a fish market? I can't remember the title. Anyway, yeah, so bringing in some cool details there would help the poem come to life. And you can see a lot of just amazing details in Elizabeth Bishop's The Fish. So thanks for Brian O'Sullivan for suggesting that poem. Okay. But really, it's one of those poems where it's really good, and so to start with. And so, if we can just add a few little bit more detail, then you can the poem come to life a little bit more. And then, if it comes to life a little more, we connect to that life, and we get a lot more stronger emotional feel out of the poem too, just by connecting with it more. That's it, right? So Desi Cochrane says, "Ode to a large tuna in the market." Yeah. But yeah, as Katie says over there, it's a top-tier poem already. It's really nice. So, add a little bit more detail and fix up that one stanza. But otherwise, it's a really good poem. Let's take a look at the other one. And this is interesting to point out too, because a lot of people might be wondering about this, the tribute to the Hyben issue. And this was submitted to this. I remember this poem. I didn't realize it was Clayton's because we don't really pay attention to the names as we're going through the poems. I do remember looking at this one. And the thing, a lot of times, people say there's just so many poems to choose from. It's really hard. And I often sort of correct Zola begrudgingly and say, actually poems tend to choose themselves. And there aren't that many great poems that are submitted. And you kind of like pick every poem you like really love. And there's not a whole lot of, extra slack, as weirdly as that works out. But in the Hyben issue, it was different. We had, well over 2,000 submissions, which means about 8,000 poems to choose from. And the haiku community was so excited that we were doing a Hyben issue because it's not something, we're one of the few sort of mainstream poetry magazines that understands and treats haiku seriously. So there were tons of excited, the best haiku or Hyben poets in that whole community, which is sort of like dealing with the slam poetry community or something. Like they have their own world. I mean, they're the best magazines there that are sort of different than the best magazines that we tend to think of. And there's just a huge world. There's its own conference. It's great poets, and it's a great thing to be part of. They all were submitting poems, so it's a huge competition. And in this case, there were a lot of Hyben that were really great, and we just didn't have room for it. It became it was the longest tribute we've had, in a very long time, over a decade. And so things really did just get edged out by poems that felt better and stronger. So let's take a look at Clayton Clark's, though. And here we go. And this is Clayton's Hyben. Now, if you're unfamiliar with the form, for anybody who's new, the Hyben form, we have a whole episode, or maybe 2 episodes, I think, of the Poetry Space on the Hyben, because we have one that's traditional Hyben and one experimental Hyben, I think, because there's a lot of play that goes along with Hyben too. This is the sort of what's become the standard type Hyben, which is you have a title, you have a section of prose, a paragraph, and then a haiku. And the haiku, should be a haiku with a cut. Haiku is 2 words, 1 breath, I like to say. That's the main part. It's not 5/7/5 counting. It's not a syllabic form, but it is placing 2 things in kind of juxtaposition or looking at each other that make you understand life better. And a lot of great examples, of course. So having that, and then having sort of the same undercutting way where there's a surprising leap within the haiku. There's a surprising leap from the prose to the the haiku too. So there's cuts all over, and there's a cut between the title. We have a lot of jumping in the Haibun, which is what makes it a great form. We talk about this all in the issue that just went to press. The tribute to the Haibun we're doing. You can do Haibun that are different forms, and we have a lot of different Haibun like that. You don't have to have the haiku come second. You can have the haiku first. You can have a whole bunch of haiku mixed into many paragraphs. You can have concrete Haibun, all sorts of things go on in the Haibun form. But this is a typical Haibun, we'll say. So let's read it. Counterfeit. And again, this is Clayton Clark, our good friend who we see a lot in that wonderful pink room when she's here on the Zoom. Counterfeit. Back when just about anyone could be killed in an amusement park, our parents took my brother and I, 9 and 7, to the Pike in Long Beach. They warned us never to stand while riding the Cyclone Racer, or we'd end up like the sailor with his head on the ground while his body finished the ride. But it was laugh in the dark that nearly did us in. The open boxcar on clacking tracks sped us beneath falling barrels, neon spooks, and piped-in shrieking laughter to the last fright. An orange, waxy-faced dummy in Depression-era clothes dangled from a noose. A real dead man, we told our parents. They laughed, patted our newly scarred heads, then took us for mint chip ice cream. Years later, 1977, while filming scenes for the $6 Million Man, the dummy's arm broke off in the grip of a stagehand that exposed human bone inside. Elmer McCurdy, a small-time thief shot dead in 1911, had quite a life, from exhibit to exhibit until finally landing at the Pike. Sturgeon Moon, following life's phases, phantom limbs. Okay, so... and then let's talk about this counterfeit too. And what's nice is when you have, we talk about very often the leap and the cut, the sort of surprising jump from the haiku being sort of about something that's related, but not exactly the same thing, like related on some, think of it as like the haiku is related on a higher plane, like it's spiritually related instead of like physically related to the prose. And that tends to be what the best haibun do. And we have that, and then we have the same kind of jump between the title and the prose and the haiku. And so counterfeit is a little bit different. Counterfeit changes the way you think about the haiku. Sturgeon Moon, following life's phases, phantom limbs. Think about that through the lens of counterfeit makes it very nice. And so that's a nice juxtaposition there. Yeah. Yes, I'm looking at some more of the, so PMB says great description. Beautiful prose, says Lynn Schilling. Katie Dozier says prose section is really so vivid and interesting. And I think to me, that's kind of what I was looking for, because I think I do love the story of the prose section. I was really engaged. There's some things we'll talk about in when we look closely. But just in general, there were great details. It was good storytelling. I was sort of on the edge of my seat like you do with the best poems. Great tension, as Nancy Sabanik says. Yeah. And so I think that's wonderful. And then you get to the haiku, and the haiku didn't seem to live up to it as far as like the energy and as interesting as it was. And I wonder, first of all, the prose is a little bit long, and we have a jump here. We're years later, so we move in time. And I wonder, I think to me... it could use multiple haiku. I think given the detail and how long the story goes, cutting it a few places and having several haiku interspersed. You'll see that with several of the haiku that we have, or haibun we have in the haibun issue, where we have several haiku throughout. I think this could really use that, because that haiku is a chance to slow us down and let us appreciate the prose more too. You can think of it that way. And so imagine if we read the first few sentences here. Back when just about anyone could be killed in an amusement park, our parents took my brother and I, 9 and 7, to the Pike in Long Beach. They warned us never to stand while riding the Cyclone Racer, or we'd end up like the sailor with his head on the ground while his body finished the ride. Then have a haiku there. I don't know, the eye of the Ferris wheel, blah, 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 But it was dark, laugh in the dark, and then you keep going. And then later, they laughed, patted our newly scarred heads, and took us for mint chocolate ice cream. And then a haiku has to do with it, somehow related to the ice cream. So you have a few haiku interspersed between this great story. I think that would really help a lot, add to the balance of it. One of the things, I think it was maybe on the Poetry Space episode where Kat Lehman was talking as a guest about experimental haiku, if I remember right. And she was talking about the balance and how important it is to sort of have each amount of weight, the amount of weight for each section to sort of be the same. So if a haiku has a lot of pop, it's got to have, correspond to sort of balance it out with the rest of the prose. So sort of they all have the same weight. And here it feels like the scale is really tipped toward the prose, where the prose is standing out a lot. In the haiku, I like Sturgeon Moon, although Sturgeon Moon, doing these moons, one of the things Lou Watts talks about, I can't remember the haiku off the top of my head, but he has a haiku sort of as the Hyben editor of Frog Pond. He sees so many haiku about moons, and he says like, I don't know how haiku goes. It's like so many rusty sturgeon middle night, I don't know. And then he goes, curmudgeon moon is the last one. But you get tired of having that, different types of moon is sort of a cliche within haiku itself. And so the sturgeon moon, even though it's an interesting detail, and a sturgeon moon's more interesting than a moon by itself, it's sort of a typical haiku. It's sort of, we've seen that before. And then I like following life's phases, phantom limbs. But I wonder, it could be, I don't know, there's something about life's phases and phantom limbs that I think could be its own haiku without the sturgeon moon. So I think that, and somehow if we focus more on the phases and then had the cut between that and the phantom limbs, I think it would be a better haiku. Shadow Soup says jerk face moon. Yeah. But that's the thing. So sturgeon moon is the full moon in August. There's a name for every full moon. And they're sort of very slightly in different traditions, but there's sort of a lot of common ones. And that has become a sort of easy place to go, as Lou Watts says in that interview. Terry Miller says the Earth needs more satellites so we can improve our haiku. Yeah. So anyway, so I think that haiku could be improved, and we could have more haiku. Another thing I wanted to point out: there's some strange use of commas in this. Is sort of like really strong asides, and I think the comma usage is trippy and I don't know, feels cluttered. So. Back when just about anyone could be killed in an amusement park, our parents took my brother and I, 9 and 7 too, comma. So we have, this is a parenthetical aside, but then I don't know why there's a comma here. So there's like this additional comma that trips you up. So there's that strange extra comma, the Pike in Long Beach. And you don't even need the second comma. So there's like two extra commas here for no reason. And that just like slows it down and seems weird. It's not like the poem, if it was a great combination of haiku, we just edit that out, But as is, I think you want to fix this kind of thing up. They warned us never to stand while riding and then Cyclone Racer is often commas by itself. And there's no reason for that. The comma here is justified if we're using, traditional style guides, because we have a full sentence after the or, so we need something to conjunct them. But this comma is unnecessary too, and it's really rare to see a comma after the. So that's strange too. Or we'd end up like the sailor with his head on the ground while his body finished the ride. I think that's really great storytelling, good detail there. But it was dark, but it was laugh in the dark. And so, I don't know, there's a comma there too that doesn't, there should be no commas there either. Yeah. Yeah, I'm just reading some of the comments now. Ian McGrath Santowski says, I would appreciate some sort of breath after To the Last Fright, perhaps a haiku there. I found the waxy-faced dummy a fairly pivotal moment to be overshadowed by the list before. So it's a good point, too. If you're going to have these extended where we add multiple haiku, you use that to sort of highlight the details that are going on in the prose and guide our attention and let the things that are really powerful stand out. And I think that's a great use of it that Ian's pointing out there. Anyway, we'll keep going a little bit more. The open boxcar on clacking tracks sped us beneath falling barrels, neon spooks, and piped-in shrieking. The shrieking laughter. I don't think you need a hyphen there either, by the way. So it's sort of over-punctuated in a lot of places. A shrieking laughter to the last fright. An orange wax-faced dummy and depression. Yeah, so I think that's another place. Maybe we could have 4 haiku and put one here, as Ian was saying. An orange wax-faced dummy in depression-era clothes dangled from a noose. One of the things, too, I think this was Roberta Beery who was talking about it maybe, but she was saying that when you have multiple haiku in a haiban, a lot of times we worry that some of the haiku aren't as strong as the others. Like we have one killer haiku, and we put that in, but then we're scared that the weight of the rest of the haiku don't stand up to that one great haiku. So that, I think, she warns us not to worry about that, I guess, is the issue. And so don't be afraid to use multiple haiku, I guess, is the point. I think I'm going to have to get some kind of... Hang on one second. I'll be right back. All right, sorry about that. Oh, that didn't even help. Hang on a second. All right, I think, is that better? The sun. It's like fine when we start, and then it moves right in the window, like right after we start. Anyway, yeah. So I think what I was saying is that you shouldn't be afraid to have, weaker haiku. Like, don't let that scare you away. That you have to come up with extra haiku. It's worth it to take the time and add extra haiku. Is the point. All right. So I think that's going to be about it for this. Let me see if there's any other comments. All right, okay. So that's going to wrap it up for Clayton's, but thanks for sharing this. Clayton? Oh, let me look over on Facebook before we go. Okay, people are saying hi on Facebook. Okay, well, hi, everybody. So Laurel Benjamin's there, Donna Best, and Bev Wendell Atherstone. All right, okay, now we're going to move on to, well, let's see. Ian McGrath Sandowski says, thoughts on the multiple haikus spreading space throughout the prose being closer related to the prose than the final haiku being a full split from it. Yeah, I think... you just try anything, like try what works, like where you're inspired. And I think there's also the idea of braided haiban where you fill in with parts of a haiku throughout to sort of slow down the text. There's just a lot of ways you can play with it, which is what makes the haiban form so fun. So I think there's a great basis for this poem here. And what we have to do is play with it and see what else we can add to flesh it out and work on that, somehow the haiban or the haiku here could be stronger with something with the phases and the phantom limb. There's something there. I think there's a real heart of that haiku. Anyway, okay, let's move on to another poem. And we'll go like this. Oh. I don't know why Google thought I was talking to them. Okay, everything's just going on. Where's the sun even coming from? Is that better? Okay, that's better. Oy. Yeah. Okay. So let's move on to another haiku. We'll go back to the oldest submissions in the queue now. We'll filter by date. It's September 23rd is the oldest submission here. Foster family. The poet is Sherry Dubis from Wanakena, New York. 2 poems here. And then the general question, what is beat poetry? Also, I do not know what categories of poems mine fall into. Free verse. Okay. The thing, what is beat poetry? And what categories of poems fall into? I don't think that really matters. Like, there are ways of labeling and talking about poems, but how you label things doesn't really affect the way poems work. I mean, poems work on a level. They don't work because there are certain forms. Certain forms are used because they work, if they're done right. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. Beat poetry is the Allen Ginsberg and all his cohort, that whole movement, which has to do with beatnik and the Beatitudes. And that sort of free-flowing, first thought, best thought type style of poetry. I think we have a Beat Poets episode on the poetry space, or was it an Allen Ginsberg poetry? But anyway, that's that style of poetry. It's a belief. If you want to be remembered as a poet, one of the best things to do, or just any artist, is to have a manifesto. And the Beats had manifestos about what they thought were good, and that's one of the reasons why we remember them, how to label the Beats. But they sort of took poems a certain direction. Yeah. And so, and so it was the whole group of beat poets, Jack Kerouac and all of them. And, And so you can look them up, but I wouldn't get caught up on what you call what. But let's take a look at these poems too. And the other question, and free verse is the same thing. I mean, and even the definition of free verse has sort of changed and means different things over time. Because originally, poetry was verse, which was using meter and rhyme as a mnemonic device to remember story. That's what poetry really is, and that's how it came to be. And then over time, we ended up having different ways. We had the printing press. We could make books with binding cheaply, and we could tell stories a different way through narrative and chapter books. We didn't need to memorize everything in order to have storytelling. And so that expanded the possibilities there, but made poetry in verse less important. And eventually we said, hey, why are we doing this regular rhyme when we're not trying to memorize everything as the center of what we're doing? And that became free verse. And originally, though, free verse was you don't have a regular meter in rhyme, you can vary it. And so if you look at the early free verse poems, William Carlos Williams, there are still things we would call formal poetry there. It doesn't feel very free at all when you have to have like 4 beats and then 6 beats and then 4. But that's what William Carlos Williams was doing, calling it free verse because it was varying verse, the variable foot. And but over time, that became even less variable to now it's just anything is free verse. And it's not even verse, really. But anyway, what you're writing is probably free verse if you have to ask, first of all. And I wouldn't get hung up on that either. So let's take a look at this poem first. This is Foster Family by Sherry Dubis. Here we go. Foster Family. Thunk. The telltale sound of feathers against glass that sunny January morning. A bird, perhaps a cedar waxwing, lay unconscious, partially submerged in fluff inches from the offending glass door. What could be done? Having been the second or third collision these past 2 weeks, our resident bird rescuer had kept a cardboard box at the ready. We assistants managed to fetch jackets and ratty towels to insulate the makeshift avian hospital. Our contribution to the cause seemed small in comparison, the confident patience of the experienced rescuer demonstrating miraculous reviving medicine in the form of radiant heat from human hands. Huddled on the garage steps, we waited. As the patient stirred, our gathering moved outdoors, fluffing feathers perched on an ungloved hand. The bird blinked, took notice of its surroundings. 3 humans, not quite a family, a triangle of questionable stability connected by a calling. One stood firm with arm outstretched, unwavering. 2 of us, never having witnessed such a feat, held our breath as breezes ruffled feathers and chilled cheeks, doubtful, hopeful, anticipating. Sunlight kissed us like seeds awaiting spring's grace. Another few breaths, and a gust offered a welcome invitation to the sky. On liftoff, we exhaled together like the gentle wind of release. Will you stay, little girl, or will you lift off into a gentle wind? If we have helped you to fly, is it selfish to ask you to stay, or at least return to us for a time? Yeah. Okay, so let's see. Yeah, Deb T says I like the opening line, calling it the telltale thunk. And yeah, I think that is a nice thunk. The telltale sound of feathers against glass, that sunny January morning. It is a very nice poem. Sheba Sue says narratively coherent, could use some sharpening, I think. And I think that's the case. I think it's nice, a nicely told story in that it doesn't follow the pitfalls that we come across very often in poems where we don't really know what's going on. Like we have the story, we're told this, which is really helpful. But it's a little bit wordy and overtells a little bit too much. So I think paring it down would really help. Yeah. Emily Arnold Fernandez says, I love the metaphor between the bird cared for briefly and the foster family. And yeah, that's what I was going to say too. So thanks for saying that. The title, Foster Family, makes the whole thing an extended metaphor in a really interesting way. And that's what makes the poem come to life. Like we have... we just talked about it with haiku, those leaps that happen within a haiku. Why haiku is two worlds in one breath, because you have to go from even a tiny poem like a haiku, you have to start somewhere and go somewhere else. It's transformative. It's a magic spell. And what does a magic spell do? It transforms. And to transform, you have to finish in a different place you started. And so all poems need to do that. They have to have some kind of sense of movement. It has to be transformative. And if you have a title like this where we can use the whole thing as an extended metaphor for foster care when we're just talking about the bird, that brings a sense of movement to the whole poem. So I think that aspect works really well, and it's really a thing to highlight. Okay, so let's go look a little more closely. Thunk, the telltale sound of feathers against glass, that sunny January morning. Very nice start. It's setting the scene. A bird, perhaps a cedar waxwing. Somebody said, yeah, I think somebody was saying, and I can't find it again, that maybe you should only use cedar or waxwing. I'm not sure. I missed that. But I like that. Perhaps a cedar waxwing lay unconscious, partially submerged in fluff inches from the offending glass door. What could be done? I like that question. What could be done? Having been the second or third collision these past 2 weeks, our resident bird rescuer kept a cardboard box at the ready. We assistants managed to fetch jackets and ratty towels to insulate the makeshift avian hospital. There's one thing about this, this what can be done, but then it's the second or third collision in 2 weeks. And that sort of begs the question, like, why not do something? Like, why not put tape on the window if birds keep crashing into it? Or why not hang something down? Like, try to find some solution. And it's sort of, in a weird way, by bringing that up, it makes you wonder, like, why all we're doing is, like, after the fact, trying to help these birds instead of before the fact. And I don't think that's where this poem really wants to go. So I would sort of, think about that and maybe take that part out just to not send you off in that direction of thought. But anyway, our resident bird rescuer kept a cardboard box at the ready. We assistants managed to fetch jackets and ratty towels. So there's something about, we assistants managed to fetch, or managed, oh, and there's an hour too, an hour that shouldn't be there. We assistants managed to, our fetch jackets and ratty towels. Like there's a lot of like verbiage, a lot of words that go in there. It's kind of clunky and could be told a lot more streamlined, just we assistants fetch jackets and ratty towels to insulate the avian hospital or something like that. It'd be half as many words and say the same thing. So there's a lot of clutter. Like when I say clutter, that's what I mean. More words than need to be told. Every word should have as much weight as possible in a poem. Like we're condensing language into its most effective use possible is what we're trying to do with these magic spells that are poems. And having excess words that you don't need, you want to have it be a natural type voice so that we can connect with it and all that natural human speech comes out. But we want to be a streamlined speech too. And it's the same thing, interestingly, if you talk about other kinds of writing, advertising writing, other kinds of professional writing. Having as few words as possible makes people less likely, as few chances as possible to daydream and lose the person paying attention. So you want to streamline things as much as we can, even as we keep them casual and natural if that fits the voice. So I think there's too many words in this poem. So that's something to work on just in general. Our contribution to the cause seemed small in comparison. And so to the cause, like, why do we need that? Our contribution seems small in comparison to the confident patience of the experienced rescuer. And so why not? And another thing too that we talk about sometimes here is that adjectives and that kind of modified speech aren't as strong ever as just the nouns and verbs themselves. And so, our contribution to the cause seems small in comparison to the patience of the rescuer. Like that's all you need. That's really what we're waiting for to hear. We don't need those modifications and adjectives, the experienced and the confident. Like we get that, we jump to that conclusion anyway, and it's just filling in a lot of syllables that we don't need to hear again. So that's what we talk about when we have a lot of clutter. Demonstrating miraculous reviving medicine in the form of radiant heat from human hands. And again, see, I think we could say the same thing about most of these lines. There's too many words in there for what it's saying. We just trim a lot back. And not trimming, of course, there's a tendency, some people like to, when we say cut, start cutting articles, the and a and stuff like that. Not those, because those are important function words. But the extra detail. You want specific, concrete, solid details where one small detail shows a lot. And that's how the poem becomes as powerful as possible. Demonstrating miraculous reviving medicine in the form of radiant heat from human hands. Huddled on the garage steps, we waited. See, this is more the voice you want. That's much more direct than all the clutter in the other sentences. As the patient stirred, our gathering moved outdoors. Fluffing feathers perched on an ungloved hand. The bird blinked, took notice of its surroundings. 3 humans, not quite a family, a triangle of questionable stability connected by a calling. I do like that. That's nice. Definition of a family. One stood firm with arm outstretched, unwavering. 2 of us, never having witnessed such a feat, held our breath as breezes ruffled feathers and chilled cheeks, doubtful, hopeful, anticipating. So again, these doubtful, hopeful, anticipating. When we say show, don't tell, that's the other thing we mean. It's something, the details, the solid, concrete details can give us the experience of doubtful, hopeful, anticipating without having to say those. And that's one of the main reasons to show, don't tell, is because you don't have to have all this extra clutter and verbiage. So cut that out. Sunlight kissed us like seeds awaiting spring's grace. And I think that's a little bit more abstract than the rest of the detail in the poems are. So for me, a little bit, maybe cutting that. Another few breaths and a gust offered a welcome invitation to the sky. That's nice. On liftoff, we exhaled together like the gentle wind of release. Will you stay, little girl? Or will you lift into a gentle wind? If we have helped you to fly, is it selfish to ask you to stay, or at least to return to us for a time? I think the return to us for a time is nice. I think somebody mentioned the ending being sort of general summarizing, and I do think if we move quicker into back to the return for a time, that would help. So James Spencer said, confident patience, contribution, abstractions need more camera eye and sound effects like the thunk and ungloved hand. So that's a great way to put it too, yeah. And Patty Arbor says, I think it takes courage to be spare to believe our reader will fill in and understand. Yeah, that's true. And it's also, it's very easy to be lost in the thread of what the poem's saying too and not get the story. And so it's like a tightrope to walk. You have to tell enough that we get the story, but don't overtell it so we get bored, And that's really the trick of good storytelling and poetry. And I think this, we get the whole story and there's the nice cut. We almost forget, which is a nice thing, that it's the foster family and that the whole thing is really an extended metaphor for that kind of care, which is a nice thing that you don't really see many poems about. So I like that a lot. But it goes a little too far in the telling of it, and sort of. Let me do one more poem, and this is a poem that we share all the time. It's Jose A. Alcantara's Divorce. Wait a minute. The Poetry Foundation comes up first. Okay. Well, it was our poem originally. The Poetry Foundation stole it. But anyway, here, this is Divorce on rattle.com. And so notice how short and concise this poem is. And we have the same kind of setup. Like if in the other poem, it is foster family. In this poem, it's divorce. That's what we're talking about. We talk about the bird situation the whole time. And we never really mention divorce, but because we have that contrast, we can suddenly make the connection. A is to B is to C or whatever. Divorce. He has flown headfirst against the glass and now lies stunned on the stone patio, nothing moving but his quick beating heart. So you go to him, pick up his delicate body and hold him in the cupped palms of your hands. You have always known he was beautiful, but it's only now in his stillness and his vulnerability that you see the miracle of his being, how so much life fits in so small a space. And so you wait, keeping him warm against the unseasonable cold, trusting that when the time is right, when he has recovered both his strength and his sense of up and down, he will gather himself, flutter once or twice, and then rise a streak of dazzling color against a slowly lifting sky. And so we never say that it's about divorce. And yet, that extended metaphor, we know that this bird we're talking about is somebody who's just, a man, because who's just gone through a divorce. And so being stunned like that, and then, not knowing what to do, all that stuff, we get the metaphor and we see that comparison. And how how divorce sneaks up on you. You don't see it coming, and then bam, it's like that invisible glass that you fall into. And so it's a wonderful extended metaphor there. But notice how he keeps it all concise. He describes the bird scene, and he never says anything about what it's about divorce. And that's how to make a really powerful poem with a really great leap. Yeah. And so the same kind of thing can be done here with Foster Family. I mean, obviously you don't want to steal his poem, but it's a similar sort of setup. And this idea of taking care of the bird is taking care of a foster child, And so if we can really streamline that down, we can make a great poem out of this. Okay, so we're going to move on to the other poem. Again, this poet is Sherry Dubis, and the other poem is this. Let me refresh. Sometimes Submittable doesn't like to load. Okay, here we go. I think one of the secrets about Submittable is that we are at the very max of what they can handle as far as submission goes and things like that. We have like a special plan that allows us to have as many submissions as we do and all sorts of stuff. And sometimes it's just too much of a load for their servers. Anyway, On the Way Back to My People, authored spring 2024. So we'll see what that means. Apparitions unexpected, a past that lived before my birth, needs unspoken, undetected, light and darkness on the earth. The fallen, broken, disrespected lie in wait to find their worth. Innovations once elected have not erased an endless dearth. I offer up some songs selected to prune their sorrow, plant their mirth. On the way back to my people. So here's a poem where we don't get enough context. So we were talking in the last poem about how we really knew what was going on and how beneficial that was. And here, I'm not really sure who my people are. And so because of that, we don't get that context. I'm not sure, it's hard to connect with the poem. So on the way back to my people, and of course, who are my people? Apparitions, and what is the significance of spring 2024? Apparitions unexpected, a past that lived before my birth. Needs unspoken, undetected, light and darkness on the earth. So we have this rhyme format, which is interesting. Where the last word rhymes in each couplet. But it's hard to follow. Befallen, broken, disrespected, lie in wait to find their worth. But who? I mean, I feel like an owl, like saying who in this poem. I don't know who we're talking about. Innovations once elected have not erased an endless dearth. That's hard to follow that one. I offer up some songs selected to prune their sorrow, plant their mirth, on the way back to my people. Yeah. Emily, I don't know, Fernandez says, what are the apparitions? Apparitions. I want to see what's happening. Yeah. References to her ancestors. Yeah, I'm not sure. So this is one of those cases where we don't really get the whole story, and it doesn't feel like it's because you don't. So I say this all the time, but the ambiguity, the thing that we don't get to know, can't be something that you don't know, that you do know. If you know something and you're just withholding it to keep us in suspense of what you're really talking about, that doesn't feel like you're trying to communicate and to connect with us. Like, if you know what you're talking about, if you know who my people are, we need those details. We need to know who the people are that you're referring to so we can start to relate and connect with the poem. But because we don't have that, we're completely, we're completely disconnected. And so let us know, let us in. Don't hide the actual story, just the basic context, the journalistic questions, who, what, why, where, when, and how. We get a when, but we don't know why, so it means nothing. We don't know the who, and so we don't have any way to connect to it. So tell us the whole story. As someone pointed out, I think Hammett Moloch says it has a nice rhythm, though. And it does. I like the rhythm and the use of rhyme. For the most part, I agree with somebody who said dearth is a stretch, and there are a few that are sort of a stretch written toward the rhyme. But yeah, as Bart Grenier says, tell the tale, don't talk around it. We're here because we want to hear stories. So never hold back the story. If you know something and you're withholding it from the reader to keep suspense or for any other reason, don't. What you have to withhold is just the mystery that you don't understand. And we're on this journey together, hearing your story to find the source of that mystery and what's important about it. And that can be the thing that's ambiguous. We don't quite understand what to make of it. But if you're giving us everything and you think there's something there, we're on your side. We want to hear it, and we can sort of work together to pick up the pieces and figure out what it all means. But we need the whole context and the actual story in order to start doing that. And we don't have that yet. We're not told. Too much is withheld. You're telling around the story instead of telling the story here. So let us know, who my people are, and then we can get into and two. As someone else mentioned, like all the stanzas are very abstract. Even if we had a strict, like, this is my people as a title, I want the details of the people, Let us know who the people are in the actual poem and let us see some of that. Okay, let's do one more submission before we go. I don't like just doing two. I mean, Clayton's was really, really worth talking about, and that first poem was interesting too. I want to do more than just two submissions there. Let's do a third. That was, though, Sherry Dubis from Winnetka, New York. And this is Payal Kudasiya from India, from Bhopal, India. And general question, I would like to know how impactful my poems are, if you can feel the pain and the emotions they portray. Okay. This is, we have two... Yeah, we have two poems. We'll try to be quick about it. In Love with You. I already sense with a title, I already get that sense that we're going to have another withholding conversation. But let's see, because we want to know who the you is, but let's see if we find out. In Love with You. I met you just months ago. I didn't even know you existed. Before that, still this longing of missing you feels like an eternity. I've been in love before. I have gotten my heart broken too. It was unbearable, yet nothing close to this. I want to get better with you. I want to wait for you. I want you in my future. Even if it means just being your friend, I just want your presence in my life. I want to hear your voice, your rare smile, the way you talk, the way you walk, the way you get excited on small stuff. So I want you in my life. I want to see you being stubborn. I want to have fun by your side. I think the poem goes on for 2 pages like this. We're just going to stop there. With this poem, we have this abstraction that we had a little bit in the last poem we saw, where there weren't really details in each couplet about who. Yep, Hammett Moloch says we want the details. Same exact thing applies. You know who the you is. You know who you're talking about, but we don't. We need to get to know them. And so if you're telling, it's one thing if you're writing a poem for yourself, for your journal, or if you're writing a poem to give to someone else, then you know who you is, you know who I is. We don't need that, or you don't need that, but we need that. We need a sense that these people are coming to life, and that comes through specific details. So, I met you just months ago in the station. You looked like this. You said this, tell the story. Again, don't withhold the story like we were just talking about. Tell the story. We want to know the story, but we have to have the story. Emotions don't come across. They're not conveyed just by explaining. Like saying, I'm sad, it doesn't make us feel sad. But saying, baby shoes for sale, never worn. Having that detail of the baby shoes, all that hope put in the shoe, that makes us feel. But the apparitions of these faces in the crowd, petals on a wet black bough. I mean, even in an abstraction, that makes us feel because of the details of the wet black bough and the way that human life falls like that. So having those kind of details, that specificity, is where the emotion lives. We're not going to feel anything by being told how to feel. Those are just, we talked at the very beginning about how labels didn't matter. It doesn't matter if you're a free verse poet or a beat poet. Who cares? It's the function of poetry. The same thing applies with a detail in the storytelling itself. A label of a thing doesn't evoke the thing. It's just a label. Like it has as much emotion as like a Post-it note with the word sad on it. But my face, if I'm frowning and crying and there's actual, you can describe it and I can feel it, that's sad. And so give us those details. Tell us the story. Don't hold it back. Don't be abstract. Be specific, precise. Give us the details. Let us see the scene, and then we'll feel. The feeling comes after that. Okay? So, anyway, and the feeling is definitely here, and that's why it's really worth it to write poems. But if you're going to write poems, it's conveying that feeling, and that's done through detail. Let's take a look. The other one's probably the same thing, but let's take a quick look. Now my heart is in pieces, and so my heart is in pieces is a cliche, and my heart goes out to you if your heart's in pieces, but we need to be told the story once again so we can feel that too. You broke my heart in a million little pieces. You took me in your arms, gave me your warmth and embrace, and then there me away. I think threw me away is what it means. When I was in pain, you hurt me more than I could ever hurt you. So again, we get no detail of the relationship. It's not like another way to think of poetry is if you're confiding like your deepest truths to a best friend or something like that. Like, we are your best friend. Tell us what happened. Like, you haven't met, say it's a friend who went off to college, came back a year later. They never met this love that you lost because they haven't seen you in a year. How would you describe them? And what details could you conjure so that we can get a sense of who this person was, who was there with love and then lost, and now I'm heartbroken. How can you tell with details that we feel like we're being confided in and told the whole story? So, So Christiana Doucette says, for writing a story, I've been taught that emotion is communicated first, physical feeling of the emotion unnamed, followed by debate with self about what to do, decision, then action. That's a great way to put it. Yeah. As Terry says, I hope things are going better for this poet. Grateful for sharing. Yeah, great too. It's part of life, hearts break and mend, and, it wouldn't be worth living if we didn't have to get to experience all the complexity and nuance of that. Yeah. So anyway, and metaphor too. Dr. Q says use metaphor for heartbreak details. Yeah, coming up with new metaphors, making us see things in a way that we hadn't thought of before. That's really the heart of what poetry is trying to do. Okay, so that is the two poems there. And that'll wrap up the show. That was the two poems by Payal Kudasiya from India. And yeah, the details are what we need. Okay. So that is going to wrap up the critique of the week for today. Thanks everybody for joining me. It's been a lot of fun, as it always is. Thanks to all three poets who contributed poems. Clayton, good to see you as always. Let's see now. This week's guest on the Rattlecast. Well, I should say too, a reminder, the Poetry Space just dropped. That's Katie Dozier's show. I'm a co-host, but she's the one who decides what we do and does all the work for it, really. I just have fun. That just dropped with an episode on workshops, which is great. It's a great guide over 2 episodes. We're splitting them up, so it's like 50 minutes for the first half and 50 minutes next week for the second. But it's a great guide on how to take, what goes into a workshop, how to get the most from even the critique of the week, or if you meet up with friends and start a writing group, that kind of workshop, whatever you do, there's ways you can get the most out of it, and that's what we're talking about a lot on the Poetry Space workshop episode. So find that on iTunes or Spotify. That's a good listen. How to get the most out of it and the common pitfalls, like all that kind of thing we talk about. So check that out. Now, this week coming up on the Rattlecast, going to remind everybody it is a special time. We are in the U.S. here. It's Super Bowl Sunday, and we want to watch the Super Bowl, even though the Bills are sadly not in. My poor Buffalo Bills, who should have won, but did not. But it's the Eagles against the Chiefs, and we do want to watch it. At least the commercials are fun, and it's fun to have a Super Bowl party. So we're not going to have the show at the regular time because we're not going to compete with the Super Bowl anyway, but we are going to have it earlier. So it's going to be 8 hours earlier than normal if you're in Europe or Eastern Europe or Africa or the Middle East, great chance to watch a show live if you usually can't because it's too late there. If you're in like China, which some viewers are, and in that area, it ends up being a little too early and kind of messes up your morning show. But we hope to have you the week after. But that's going to be Rattlecast 280. The guest this week is S.C. Flynn, an Irish poet. Grew up in Australia, though, and then is back in Ireland now. His first book, he's got some novels, too, but his first book of poetry is The Color of Extinction. Really wonderful cover there, as you can see. He's going to be the guest at that special early time, noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. Check that out in your own time zone. That's Rattlecast number 280. The prompt for this week, which I should have pulled up already. Hang on. And by Friday, I don't remember the prompts at all. And it's a good reminder because I have to write a poem still. So the prompt for this week was to write an elegy that's not about a person. So an elegy for something, but not about a person. So that's your prompt for this week. Your guest is S.C. Flynn, Rattlecast number 280. The regular time, no, not the regular time, a special time, noon Eastern, Sunday, February 9th. Oh no, I talked too long. The music, we got to start the music again. Hang on. Here we go. But anyway, yeah, February 9th. Hope to see you then. Hope you have a great weekend in the meantime. And we'll talk to you later. Bye.